It all started when my parents demanded that I sell the house worth €800,000 that my grandmother had left to my younger sister, Sophie. They told me with unmistakable authority that if I refused, I would be completely cut off from the family. The sense of being threatened, of being controlled by the very people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, was both infuriating and heartbreaking. I looked at the house, a place filled with childhood memories, and realized it was more than just property. It was a symbol of fairness and respect in my family. Instead of confronting them head-on, I chose a different path. I acted strategically, quietly, and deliberately. I had already sold the house 3 days before their demand to someone they would never have guessed. The satisfaction wasn't in defying them openly, but in reclaiming control over my own life and protecting what was rightfully Sophie's. This experience taught me that strength often comes in subtle, calculated moves rather than in loud arguments. If you've ever had to stand up to protect what's yours, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And if you find this story compelling, don't forget to like and subscribe. I want to build a community that celebrates self-respect and courage. Part 1. Growing up in Sophie's shadow. I was born in a small suburban town just outside Brussels, a place where cobblestone streets and red brick houses whispered stories of history and tradition. As the eldest child of the Moreau family, I should have held a special place in my parents' hearts. But in my family, all the light seemed to shine on Sophie, my younger sister, who was 3 years my junior. Sophie, with her golden hair that caught the sunlight and a smile that made strangers melt, was the center of attention. My parents, Henri and Claire, often referred to her as their little treasure. And me? I was Elise, the independent daughter who didn't need much attention. The label was meant to sound complimentary, but to me it always rang hollow. By the age of 12, I was already riding my bike to the public school in town, while my parents chauffeured Sophie to a prestigious private academy in the city center. "Elise can manage on her own," my mother would say, as if it were a badge of honor. But the unspoken message was clear. I was not worthy of the same opportunities that Sophie enjoyed effortlessly. I remember once bringing home my report card filled with straight A's, beaming with pride. My father barely glanced at it for 3 seconds before asking, "Did Sophie win anything in her piano competition?" "She's been practicing so diligently." My achievements were expected. Every move Sophie made was treated as miraculous. Sophie was enrolled in ballet, violin lessons, and summer camps in France that cost more than I could imagine. One week, I asked my parents for €150 to join the school debate club. My father's response was a flat, "We need to prioritize expenses, Elise." Yet that same week, they bought Sophie a €3,000 laptop to nurture her creativity. Contrast between us was glaring, and I learned early on that my worth in my parents' eyes was measured by visibility and perfection, not effort or character. But there was one person who truly saw me, my grandmother, Margot. She would quietly slip into my room, settle into the chair beside me, and ask, "How is my talented girl today?" She listened intently as I described my robotics club, my volunteer shifts at the library, and even my dreams of traveling abroad. Her eyes would light up with pride, as if every small victory of mine was a jewel she treasured. One night, when I was 16, after my parents had skipped my awards ceremony to attend Sophie's ballet recital, I asked my grandmother, "Why do they love Sophie more?" She drew me close, her lavender-scented perfume wrapping around me like a protective shield. "Elise, they don't love Sophie more," she said softly. "They love the image Sophie gives them, a perfect version of themselves. You, on the other hand, are who they really are, hardworking, practical, unadorned. That makes them uncomfortable." Her words became my compass. I realized that love in my family was conditional, tied to appearances and expectations rather than genuine affection. I learned to navigate my parents' approval carefully, measuring every word, every request, knowing that asking for too much would be seen as audacity. School became both a refuge and a proving ground. While Sophie dazzled in extracurriculars chosen for her, I dove into mine with determination to prove my worth through competence. I spent hours at the library, reading beyond the curriculum, absorbing knowledge with a hunger I could never fully express at home. The robotics club, I was not just a participant, I was a leader, the one who figured out the problems no one else could solve. Yet, every accolade I earned was often overshadowed by Sophie's smile on a stage or the latest trophy she brought home. Birthdays and holidays were equally revealing. While Sophie received extravagant gifts and endless attention, I was gifted practicality. One year, for my 15th birthday, I received a neatly wrapped notebook and a set of pens, while Sophie's room overflowed with designer dresses and jewelry. The message was consistent. Elise was capable, self-sufficient, and visible. Sophie was adored, fragile, the centerpiece. Family gatherings magnified this dynamic. Dinners, my parents would lean forward to praise Sophie's small accomplishments, laughing and marveling at her every word, while I had to content myself with polite nods or the occasional dismissive comment. Conversations were minefields. Any attempt to insert myself risked comparison, ridicule, or being labeled ambitious in a way that implied arrogance rather than merit. Yet, despite the emotional imbalance, I grew resilient. Margot's quiet acknowledgement of my efforts became a sanctuary. I learned to find satisfaction not in applause but in mastery and knowledge. When Sophie's piano teacher boasted about her prodigy, I reminded myself of the late nights I spent solving equations, coding programs, and leading my peers in projects. Recognition at home was scarce, but competence became my secret currency. Teenage years brought subtle rebellion. I began asserting small boundaries, refusing to participate in frivolous social events that only highlighted Sophie's success, choosing instead solitary pursuits that fueled my mind and ambition. I realized early that my parents' favoritism could not define my self-worth. Every small act of autonomy, a bike ride alone, a book chosen against their preference, a scholarship application submitted quietly, was a declaration. Elise existed independent of Sophie's shadow. By the time I was 18, I had internalized a crucial lesson. In a family that loves the image of perfection more than the person beneath it, survival requires strategy, patience, and silent assertion. I learned to keep my victories discreet, to celebrate privately, and to seek mentorship outside parental validation. Margot remained my guide, reminding me that genuine acknowledgement sometimes comes from those who see rather than those who show. This foundation shaped the adult I would become. It was no coincidence that years later I would confront my family's manipulations not with anger or outbursts, but with careful legal precision. Growing up in Sophie's shadow had taught me patience, observation, and the quiet, unyielding power of self-reliance. Childhood that seemed unfair and lonely was, paradoxically, the crucible in which my resilience was forged. Even now, as I reflect on those years, the contrast between visibility and worth, attention and merit, continues to define my perspective. Sophie remains brilliant and charming, adored by many, but I have learned that recognition is not a zero-sum game. My achievements, though quieter, are no less significant. And it was that understanding, seated in childhood and nurtured by my grandmother's unwavering support, that eventually gave me the courage to make decisions that would shock my entire family. Because in the end, Elise was always there, quietly shaping her destiny, learning the art of strategic strength while everyone else focused on Sophie's sparkle. That quiet strength would one day allow me not just to survive, but to reclaim what was mine on my terms. Part 2: The Journey to Independence. I worked 3 jobs just to pay for my university tuition at Leuven, majoring in finance. Early mornings were spent tutoring high school students, afternoons in the bustling campus library managing research projects, and evenings at a small cafe serving cappuccinos to customers who rarely tipped. I often came home exhausted, my fingers stained with ink from balancing spreadsheets late into the night. Every cent mattered. Every hour counted. Meanwhile, Sophie was pursuing her passion for art in Paris. Her tuition, rent, and all expenses were generously covered by our parents. While I meticulously budgeted to buy a simple laptop and use secondhand textbooks, Sophie moved effortlessly through her world of galleries, workshops, and creative networking events. There was no question of sacrifice for her. Everything seemed designed to ensure she would flourish, while I had to claw my way forward with grit and determination. I graduated with distinction, receiving honors that reflected years of relentless effort. Yet my parents were in Italy celebrating Sophie's engagement, a celebration that stretched, somewhat absurdly, for 4 months. When the day came for me to receive my professional finance certification, only my grandmother Margot attended. She arrived with a radiant smile and a modest bottle of wine, a simple gesture that meant more to me than the grandeur of any family gala. That day, her presence reminded me that validation does not always come from those who claim to love you. My 25th birthday left a wound that has never fully healed. I had secretly hoped for a small family dinner, a token acknowledgement of the woman I had become. Instead, I awoke to an Instagram post from my mother. A fabulous shopping day with my little girl. The photo showed Claire and Sophie raising champagne glasses in a luxurious Antwerp boutique, laughter frozen perfectly in time. Not a single phone call. Not a single message. The exclusion was deliberate, but the sting was personal. Meanwhile, when Sophie graduated, albeit 2 years later than planned, our parents orchestrated an extravagant party for 60 guests, complete with a professional photographer and a string quartet. Sophie was hailed as the shining star, while I received a brief text, "Congratulations, Elise." The contrast was brutal, a constant reminder that my accomplishments, however significant, were secondary, almost incidental, to Sophie's celebrated life. Yet, through it all, my grandmother Margot remained unwavering. She never forgot me. She visited my small apartment with homemade pasta whenever I passed major financial exams, bringing warmth and sustenance in equal measure. She framed my first business card and proudly displayed it at her book club, announcing, "This is my talented granddaughter." Her pride was authentic, untainted by comparison. "You are creating a meaningful life, Elise," she said during one Sunday lunch, her voice gentle but firm. "They may not see it, but I see it. And one day you will have more than just my love to remember me by." At the time, I didn't realize she was speaking of Linden Street, the family home where I had spent every summer and holiday, where the sweetest memories of unconditional love had been carved into my heart. The house was modest yet enchanting. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a garden of carnations that bloomed year-round. It was a sanctuary where the pressures of favoritism faded and where my grandmother's presence made me feel cherished. I had thought I lost her forever when she passed away last year, a loss that left a hollow ache in my chest. The thought of never hearing her voice again, never feeling her quiet pride, was almost unbearable. Then came the call from Vanderberg, the family lawyer. I remember the day vividly. The rain tapped softly against my apartment window as his voice, calm and formal, invited me to attend the reading of Margot's will. I felt a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. What could she have left me? Would it be something symbolic, a keepsake, or something tangible that carried weight beyond sentiment? I arrived at the office early, heart pounding. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and aged leather, a smell that immediately transported me to Margot's study. The lawyer welcomed me with a polite nod, his eyes betraying nothing. Other relatives filtered in slowly, each one dressed in carefully selected attire that suggested respect but concealed true intentions. I was surprised to see none of my parents among them, an absence that felt like both relief and a subtle sting. As Vanderberg read the will, I listened intently, every word echoing in my mind. Then came the moment that changed everything. Margot had left me the Linden Street house. Not as a loan, not as a suggestion, but outright ownership. She had entrusted me with a piece of our family's history, a space she knew would be mine alone. The house was not just bricks and mortar. It was the embodiment of the unconditional love she had always shown me, a sanctuary that no one could take away. Emotions surged, grief, gratitude, disbelief. I thought of every summer spent tending the garden with her, every evening she had patiently guided me through financial literacy lessons disguised as life advice, every whispered word of encouragement when my parents had overlooked me. The house was more than inheritance. It was a statement, Margot's final gift and acknowledgement that I had mattered all along. And yet, even with this gift, I felt a twinge of tension. My parents were bound to be furious. The thought of confrontation, of being accused of selfishness or betrayal, loomed large. But I also felt a strange thrill. For once, I held power. Not in a way that demanded approval or recognition, but in the quiet, unassailable way that comes from rightful ownership and careful planning. In the weeks that followed, I walked through Linden Street again, each room stirring memories and emotions. The sunlight streaming through the kitchen window reminded me of the countless breakfasts shared with Margot, of stories told over cups of tea, of laughter that had no audience beyond the two of us. The garden, with its carnations in riotous bloom, seemed to nod in welcome. For the first time, I felt a sense of belonging that was entirely my own. This moment marked a turning point in my life. It was not just about the house. It was about recognizing that I could carve out a life independent of parental approval, that I could claim what was mine with dignity and strategic foresight. Growing up overshadowed by Sophie had taught me patience, resilience, and the quiet art of asserting myself without theatrics. Now, as an adult, I had the tools to apply those lessons in concrete, transformative ways. The journey to independence had been long and arduous. From juggling 3 jobs to pay for my education, to navigating the painful neglect of my parents, to finding solace and guidance in my grandmother, I had learned that strength is often forged in the crucible of invisibility. The Linden Street house became a symbol of that journey, a testament to perseverance, integrity, and the enduring power of genuine love. Looking back, I understood that life had been preparing me for this moment in ways I hadn't fully appreciated at the time. Every overlooked achievement, every comparison to Sophie, every quiet moment of study or work had honed my instincts, sharpened my resolve, and cultivated a sense of agency that could never be taken away. The house was more than inheritance. It was the culmination of years of silent struggle and triumph. And so I embraced this inheritance not as a mere asset, but as a beacon of autonomy. It represented the possibility of living on my own terms, making decisions guided by principle rather than expectation, and preserving the memory of someone who had loved me without condition. I realized that independence was not only about financial stability or career success, it was about creating spaces, relationships, and memories that affirmed one's value, even when the world outside failed to do so. With Linden Street under my stewardship, I finally felt the empowerment that had eluded me for so long. I could host friends, nurture creativity, and build routines that reflected my true self. Each room, each corner, carried the essence of Margot's love and wisdom, reminding me that recognition often comes from those who see us most clearly, rather than from those who merely perform affection. In that moment, I resolved to honor Margot's legacy. I would protect what she had entrusted to me, not with confrontation or resentment, but with careful, deliberate action. I understood that life would continue to present challenges, especially from those who sought to control or diminish me. But I also knew that I possessed the knowledge, patience, and inner strength to navigate those challenges successfully. Linden Street was no longer just a house, it was a foundation upon which I could build a life that reflected my values, accomplishments, and independence. And in claiming it, I began the next chapter of my life, one where I would no longer live in Sophie's shadow, but in the light of my own hard-earned agency, resilience, and self-respect. Part 3: The House and the Family Storm. The Linden Street house was more than just a property. It was valued at €800,000, located in one of the most coveted neighborhoods near Amsterdam's tech hub, just a few minutes' walk from the train station. For most people, it would have been an impressive investment, a prestigious address. For me, it was a repository of memories and lessons. The kitchen where my grandmother taught me to bake apple tarts, the front porch where we sat reading quietly for hours, the garden that instilled in me the belief that patience could yield wonders. That time, I was living in a cramped apartment in Rotterdam, commuting 45 minutes to work each day. The Linden Street house represented stability, a real home, something I had never truly had. It wasn't just about square footage or property value. It was about continuity, about anchoring myself in a place where I could cultivate life on my own terms. Especially now, with my new position as a financial analyst at the same company where Sophie had been appointed marketing manager, the house symbolized a foothold in a world that often seemed skewed in favor of my sister. But just a few days after the reading of Margot's will, in which I was officially declared the sole heir, my family began applying pressure. My mother's call came first. Her voice, unusually saccharine, carried that subtle undertone that made me instinctively tense. "Elise," she said, "the house is a big responsibility. Perhaps too big for you alone." Not to be outdone, my father was blunt. "Sophie needs the house more. You've already settled yourself. You'll be fine without it." Sophie herself joined the fray, her crocodile tears dripping through the phone. "I'm not saying you have to give it to me, Elise," she whined, "but sharing that wouldn't hurt. You already have somewhere to live." My somewhere to live was a tiny, leaky apartment with mold creeping along the walls and a water heater that threatened to fail at the worst possible moments. The suggestion that I should give up the Linden Street house felt like a direct affront to every struggle I had endured to reach independence. The pressure intensified with a barrage of messages. "Family is about sharing, Elise. Don't be selfish. Sophie is starting her new life. She needs the house. Grandma would be disappointed by your greed." I nearly laughed at the last one. Grandma Margot, the same woman who had once said that my parents would sell even my shadow if Sophie needed money, disappointed in me? The irony was almost too sharp to bear. Meanwhile, Sophie lamented to friends about not having enough money to buy a home with her new boyfriend, even though her parents continued to fund her luxurious apartment in the heart of Paris. The crescendo came in the form of a family meeting at the lawyer's office. My parents arrived with a real estate agent, Madame Dubois, a seasoned professional who apparently had already lined up a potential buyer. My father presented the ultimatum plainly. "Either you agree to sell and split the proceeds, or you are no longer considered part of this family." I stared at the message, my chest tight, the room spinning slightly as if the walls themselves were closing in. The emotional weight of the words pressed on me like a physical force. For hours I sat, staring at my phone, the law firm's polished hardwood floor beneath my fingers, feeling both trapped and strangely exhilarated. Then the phone buzzed again. A new message from an unknown number. "Elise, this is Lucas De Vries. I heard you're considering selling the Linden Street house. I'm very interested." Lucas, my college friend, the one whose wit had matched mine in late-night debates and caffeine-fueled study sessions, now the CEO of the very company where Sophie worked. My lips curved into a smile, subtle, controlled, almost imperceptible, but there nonetheless. They wanted me to sell the house? Fine. But I would choose the buyer. I would dictate the terms, and they wouldn't see it coming. The days that followed were a whirlwind of calculated planning and strategic patience. Every phone call from my parents was met with measured politeness, every message from Sophie dissected with precision. I allowed myself no emotional reactions. They were trying to elicit guilt, shame, or compliance. Instead, I reminded myself of what Linden Street represented: years of struggle, lessons learned, and a legacy left by the only person who had truly believed in me. My parents, predictably, escalated their tactics. They called repeatedly, alternating between pity-laden entreaties and thinly veiled threats. "Elise, think of Sophie," my mother would coo, her words dripping with false tenderness. "She's family. You wouldn't want to deprive her, would you?" My father would follow with a more austere tone. "You've done well for yourself. You don't need this house. Sophie does." And Sophie, dear Sophie, sent messages punctuated with crying emojis, imploring, cajoling, and weaponizing every ounce of sibling familiarity she could muster. Yet I remained unmoved. The Linden Street house was mine, not because I was selfish, but because it was rightfully bequeathed to me by someone whose judgment I trusted implicitly. I had worked tirelessly to establish independence, fought for recognition that my parents refused to grant, and learned the value of calculated action over emotional surrender. This was not just a property, it was a symbol of everything I had endured and accomplished. When Madame Dubois visited to appraise the property, I observed her cool professionalism with interest. She had come expecting cooperation, assuming that family loyalty would override my autonomy. But I had no intention of conceding. I asked precise questions about the potential buyer, the transaction timeline, and the implications for taxes and ownership transfer. Every word, every gesture was deliberate. I was no longer the overlooked eldest child. I was Elise Moreau, fully aware of my rights and prepared to enforce them. Lucas's eventual visit to view the house was an unexpected comfort. His demeanor was calm yet confident, familiar yet impressive in his authority. We walked through the rooms together, recalling small anecdotes from our university days, exchanging insights about career paths and shared memories. For the first time in weeks, the anxiety that had plagued me since the reading of the will eased. I knew the house would be in capable hands, someone who respected its history and the emotional significance it carried. Meanwhile, my family's efforts grew increasingly desperate. Sophie, learning that I had met with Lucas, ramped up emotional appeals, crafting messages that blended flattery, faux concern, and subtle guilt. "Think of the memories we could share," she wrote. "It would be lovely if we could keep the house together for both of us." I read each one carefully, weighing tone, intent, and likely manipulation tactics. I did not respond immediately. I knew that any sign of weakness could be exploited, and I refused to play their game. Finally, the day came when I formally accepted Lucas's offer. The satisfaction was quiet, almost imperceptible, but profound. I had not capitulated to family pressure. I had exercised choice, agency, and prudence. The Linden Street house would leave my possession, yes, but under terms I had set, with a buyer who appreciated its worth and, more importantly, respected my autonomy. When I informed my parents of the decision, their reactions were predictable: anger, disbelief, thinly veiled attempts at outrage. My mother's voice trembled with irritation. "Elise, you don't understand. This is about family." My father's tone was clipped and formal, as if issuing a reprimand. "You've made a decision without considering the broader consequences." Sophie cried over the phone, her voice breaking with faux despair. "I can't believe you're doing this to me. We could have shared it." I listened without interruption, without argument, without apology. I knew that no explanation would satisfy them, and none was required. The Linden Street house was never about appeasing their expectations. It was about honoring the one person who had truly believed in me and, in doing so, reclaiming a measure of power that had long been denied. That evening, as I sat in my modest Rotterdam apartment, a sense of peace settled over me. The house had been sold, yes, but the act of choosing had reaffirmed something far greater: my capacity to define my own life, to assert boundaries, and to claim what was rightfully mine. The storm had passed, not through confrontation, but through strategy, patience, and unwavering self-respect. And for the first time in decades, I felt the exhilarating freedom that comes from standing firm, not in defiance of family, but in alignment with oneself. The Linden Street house was gone, but the lessons it represented, resilience, prudence, and the quiet power of autonomy, remained, etched into the foundation of who I had become. Part 4: The Unexpected Turn. I arranged to meet Lucas at a small, tucked-away cafe in Amsterdam, a place with warm wooden tables and the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee. He arrived promptly, carrying the same composed confidence I remembered from our university days, though now tempered by years of professional experience. Lucas was sharp, articulate, and calm, the kind of presence that could anchor a room. Yet, beneath the polished exterior, I recognized the friend who had once spent late nights debating strategy and ethics with me over shared notebooks and strong espresso. "I remember how your family treated you back in college," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "They didn't make it easy for you." His words carried no judgment, only acknowledgement. "This time, you're in charge of everything." I recounted the story of the Linden Street house, the will, and the mounting pressure from my parents and Sophie. I explained how messages and calls had flooded in, how my parents' insistence had bordered on coercion, and how Sophie's tears and pleas had been designed to manipulate me. Lucas listened intently, nodding, his eyes reflecting both understanding and quiet admiration. Through a pause, he leaned back, considering his words. "I want to make this simple for you," he said finally. "I'll buy the house for 850,000 euros, higher than market value. But there's more. I want to offer you a leaseback option for 10 years at a reduced rate and a right of first refusal if I ever sell. You keep living there, you retain control, and you retain your independence." The offer stunned me, but I recognized its brilliance immediately. Preserved both the emotional significance of the home and my autonomy. Terms were generous, legally binding, and completely private. Contract was drawn, reviewed, and signed 3 days before the scheduled family meeting in absolute secrecy. Lucas's foresight had given me a hidden advantage, a quiet but decisive edge in the game my family thought they controlled. The day of the family meeting arrived at Van der Berg's office. My parents, Sophie and Madame Dubois, appeared like a small army, their expressions a mix of expectation, irritation, and barely concealed triumph. The table was set with meticulous precision, papers neatly stacked, pens at the ready, and Madame Dubois positioned confidently as if the outcome were a foregone conclusion. "We already have a buyer," my father announced, his tone sharp, rehearsed. "Cash, immediate transaction, no delays." He laid out the papers as if that alone would intimidate me into compliance. I maintained a calm facade, the hard-earned composure I had cultivated over years of familial pressure. Chess had been one of the few disciplines my grandmother Margot had shared with me, an art of patience, foresight, and control. She had taught me never to reveal your next move. Never let others sense your strategy. I adopted that same principle now, letting the silence stretch, letting them wonder if I was shaken, intimidated, or uncertain. Sophie's tears came quickly, the sobs trembling through her voice. "Why are you making this so difficult, Elise?" she cried, a mix of anger and desperation that barely masked her sense of entitlement. My father's threats followed, clipped and authoritative. "If you do not sell, you will lose everything, your place in this family, holidays, your future." His words were designed to instill guilt, fear, and hesitation. I stood slowly, deliberately. My pulse was steady, my voice, calm but firm, carried across the room like a bell tolling clarity. I reached for my phone, and a single notification lit the screen. It was Lucas. "The contract is complete. Ready whenever you are." I took a deep breath, letting the moment stretch, savoring the anticipation. Then I addressed the room with quiet authority. The culmination of years of patience, resilience, and planning finally crystallized in a single act. "I have something to say," I began. "I've sold the house. 3 days ago." The room froze. Eyes widened. Mouths parted. The air seemed to vibrate with disbelief. "To whom?" my mother finally shouted, her voice cracking between anger and incredulity. I smiled, not maliciously, but with a calm certainty that unsettled them more than any shouting could. "You'll see," I said softly, deliberately. "Come to Linden Street. You'll find out." The moment stretched on, a silence punctuated only by shallow breaths and the rustle of papers. My father's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth, then closed it, as if weighing words that would be meaningless in the face of reality. Sophie's hands trembled, the tears now mingled with frustration and fear. Madame Dubois shifted uneasily, clearly unsettled by the revelation that her carefully orchestrated plan had been preempted. I could feel the tension thickening, a storm ready to break, yet I stood unmoved. Years of preparation, years of navigating their favoritism, years of quiet resilience, all of it coalesced into this moment. I realized something profound. The house itself was never about money or property. It had always been about agency, control, and the right to determine the course of my own life. "You see," I continued, my voice steady, "this is not about defying you. It's about honoring the person who trusted me implicitly, who saw me when no one else did, Grandma Margot." My eyes swept the room, lingering for a moment on each of them. She believed in me when it mattered, and I intend to live in accordance with that trust, not according to your demands. Sophie's protests grew louder, her voice shaking with desperation. But we could have shared it. We're family. You can't do this alone. I shook my head gently. I am family. And being family does not mean surrendering what is rightfully mine, nor does it mean compromising my future to appease guilt or expectation. I've learned over the years that love and validation are not commodities to be bartered. My father's response was clipped, almost mechanical. You've made a choice. We'll see what consequences follow. But the uncertainty in his eyes betrayed him. My measured calm had disrupted the power dynamic he thought he controlled. For the first time, Sophie looked truly uncertain. Her theatrics, the crocodile tears, the pleading, the manipulation had failed to sway me. I realized she had never imagined I would act independently, that I would make a decision rooted in strategy rather than emotion. The realization seemed to shock her more than any words I could have spoken. Lucas's intervention had been subtle but decisive. By finalizing the contract before the family meeting, he had shifted the leverage entirely. The house was legally sold, binding, irreversible, and structured to preserve my continued use of it. My family's insistence, their ultimatums, their carefully constructed threats, all of it collapsed in the face of that quiet, deliberate act. As I watched their faces, I felt a complex mixture of emotions, vindication, relief, even a faint trace of sorrow for the years of tension and neglect, but above all, a profound sense of empowerment. I had finally claimed something that was unequivocally mine, without capitulation, without compromise, and without losing my integrity. I gathered my things, my movements deliberate, composed, yet filled with a newfound lightness. I realized that the battle was never about the house itself, but about asserting my voice, claiming my right to choose, and establishing the boundaries my family had repeatedly ignored. The house had become a symbol, yes, but more importantly, the act of selling it on my terms was a testament to the life I had painstakingly built for myself. As I left Vanderberg's office, I felt an odd calm settle over me. Outside, the streets of Amsterdam bustled, indifferent to the familial storm I had just weathered. But within me, a quiet triumph resonated. The Linden Street house was no longer a point of contention. It was a testament to careful planning, to patience, to strategic thinking, and to unwavering self-respect. The unexpected turn, the secret sale, the legal safeguard, the quiet defiance was not just a victory over my family's pressure. It was a confirmation that I could navigate the complexities of life with intelligence, foresight, and grace. And in that confirmation, I felt something I had long craved, the freedom to define my life on my own terms. Later that evening, I returned to the quiet of my Rotterdam apartment. The city lights flickered outside, reflections on the canal water like tiny, deliberate reminders that life moves in cycles, some visible, some hidden, all shaping the paths we choose. I sat with a cup of tea, savoring the stillness, reflecting on the journey from a girl overlooked in her own home to a woman capable of decisive action and independent thought. The storm had passed, leaving clarity in its wake. I understood now that the power I had sought all those years, the recognition, the respect, the ability to act without fear, was not given by anyone else. It had always been within me, waiting for the moment I chose to claim it. The Linden Street house, Lucas's support, and my careful planning were simply the instruments by which I exercised that power. And as I sipped my tea, I allowed myself a small, private smile. The family may never understand the lessons embedded. Part 5: Confrontation on Linden Street. The drive to Linden Street felt surreal, almost like walking toward a funeral. I was alone in my car, calm and collected, while my parents, Sophie and Madame Dubois, followed in their black SUV. I imagined them whispering, plotting, trying to formulate the perfect angle of intimidation. Their strategy was predictable, rehearsed, a performance in entitlement and expectation. I, on the other hand, had no plans but to walk in with quiet certainty. As I approached the house, my breath caught. Parked in the driveway was a pristine white Porsche, Lucas's car. The gleam of the paint and the subtle chrome detailing radiated authority and understated wealth. Sophie's face immediately drained of color. Her voice trembled in a whisper, barely audible above the hum of engines. "That's his car!" Lucas De Vries. I stepped onto the porch, my heels clicking softly on the polished wood. The door swung open, and there he was, Lucas, standing casually, wearing tailored yet relaxed attire that somehow conveyed power without effort. His smile was calm, confident, and disarmingly familiar. "Hello, Elise," he said, his voice warm yet steady. Perfect timing. Before I could respond, my mother's voice pierced the air, high-pitched and incredulous. "What's going on here?" Lucas gestured lightly, as if to acknowledge her, then spoke with calm precision. "I am the new owner of this house. Contract was finalized 3 days ago, 850,000 euros above market value. The sale is legally binding." My father's face turned crimson, veins visible at his temple. "This is a scam," he roared, stomping his foot, the volume more desperate than convincing. But the voice of reason came from Van der Berg, our lawyer, who had remained silently observing the unfolding chaos. "The contract is fully legitimate," he said firmly. "Elise has complete authority to sell the property. All documentation is in order and verified." Sophie's mouth fell open, her hands clutching the front of her blouse as if she might physically hold back the inevitable. Lucas continued, his voice unwavering, calm as a still lake. "The house will serve as a satellite office for my company. Sophie will work here, in the old study room that belonged to Grandma Margot, while Elise retains the upstairs residence under a 10-year lease, with rights to renew or repurchase if desired." Sophie's reaction was instantaneous. She staggered back a step, nearly losing her balance. "This is psychological torture," she shrieked, her words echoing off the brick walls. Her face was pale, flushed with shock and outrage simultaneously. Lucas's expression remained calm, almost clinical, as he explained the logistics further. "If Sophie wishes to transfer teams to avoid this arrangement, she may request it, but understand that doing so would entail a demotion." My mother's lips quivered, trying to form a rebuttal, but every argument fell flat against the irrefutable legal reality Lucas and Van der Berg presented. My father attempted to regain control, waving a hand toward the papers on the table. "We could challenge this in court. Surely the sale can be reversed. Our family has rights." Van der Berg remained stoic, pushing the stack of contracts forward. "All statutes have been complied with. Transfer is complete. Any challenge would be baseless. Elise has acted entirely within her legal and moral rights." Sighed, the murmurs of neighbors had grown audible. Slowly, individuals began to emerge, drawn by the unusual spectacle of a family dispute escalating on the quiet, tree-lined street. A familiar voice called out Mrs. Van Houten, the elderly neighbor from next door, who had witnessed much of my childhood in this house. "Margot would be proud of you, Elise," she shouted, her voice carrying across the yard. "We've all seen how they treated you for years." My mother's face flushed with embarrassment, the color deepening to a shade of fury and helplessness. Her mouth opened to retort, but no words came. She was effectively silenced, not by argument, but by the collective acknowledgement of neighbors who had seen the pattern of favoritism and neglect. Sophie, desperate and frantic, tried one last tactic. She strode toward me, reaching out with trembling hands, tears streaking her cheeks. "Elise, please. Don't do this. Think of us, your family. You can't just take everything for yourself." I inhaled slowly, my heartbeat steady, each word deliberate as I faced the sister I had long overshadowed. "I am thinking of us," I said, my tone calm, almost soothing. "But us does not mean surrendering what is mine. It means honoring the legacy of Grandma Margot, who trusted me when no one else would. This house is not a bargaining chip. It is part of the life I am building, independently, responsibly, and with foresight. Lucas stepped slightly to the side, hands in pockets, observing the family's unraveling with quiet assurance. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone reinforced the legitimacy of the sale. Portia gleamed behind him, a silent reminder of the support network that had ensured the plan's success. Tension was almost palpable, hanging in the air like the charged calm before a storm. Sophie's sobs became quieter, more desperate, but no longer convincing. She realized slowly that her usual tactics of tears and manipulation were impotent here. I had anticipated, planned, and executed a move that they had not foreseen, and in that realization I could see her frustration crystallize. My father's face was set in a rigid mask of disbelief and anger. His threats had no purchase, his authority undermined by legality, strategy, and social witnesses. My mother's attempts at emotional leverage crumbled similarly, her voice barely audible against the murmurs of the growing crowd. Madame Dubois shifted nervously, clearly unsettled by the revelation. She had come expecting cooperation, assuming Elise would fold under familial pressure. But she now recognized that I was neither the naive eldest daughter she had anticipated nor the easy negotiable heir. I was fully aware, fully prepared, and entirely in control. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, whispering amongst themselves. Some held smartphones discreetly, capturing images of the confrontation. The Linden Street house, normally a quiet sanctuary, had become a stage, and the performance was one I had carefully choreographed from behind the scenes. One neighbor, Mrs. Van Houten, leaned over the picket fence, voice firm and unwavering. "Elise, you've always been brilliant and deserving." Margot would be smiling from above. "Stand your ground." The words, public and unequivocal, struck my parents harder than any legal document or personal argument could. There was no room left for intimidation. Their usual tools, guilt, threats, and emotional coercion were nullified by community acknowledgement. I took a deep breath, turning back to Sophie. Her lips quivered, her tears a mix of anger and helplessness. I felt no malice, only the resolute calm of someone who had learned to act strategically, to uphold boundaries, and to honor the person who had truly believed in her, Grandma Margot. "This ends here," I said softly but firmly. "You may attend, observe, or protest, but the house is no longer a point of negotiation. It belongs to the person who earned it and chose its future." Lucas nodded slightly, as if to reinforce the declaration, and motioned toward the door. "Elise will reside upstairs. I will oversee the use of the office spaces. Everything is in accordance with the legal terms we agreed upon." My mother's face contorted in frustration, my father's jaw clenched, and Sophie looked as though the world itself had shifted beneath her feet. The reality they had tried so desperately to control was no longer within their grasp. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Linden Street facade, a profound sense of closure settled over me. Confrontation had been inevitable, but it had been executed with strategy, foresight, and calm determination. I had faced my family, upheld my autonomy, and ensured that the legacy of those who believed in me would be preserved. And as I stood there, looking out across the familiar garden, the house no longer merely a structure of brick and mortar but a symbol of resilience, strategy, and self-respect, I realized something deeply satisfying. I had finally claimed my place, not through defiance but through wisdom, preparation, and unwavering conviction. The Linden Street house, once a source of familial tension, now represented the culmination of years of perseverance, the quiet triumph of careful planning, and the affirmation of my right to shape my own destiny. Aside, neighbors murmured their support, and inside, my family confronted the undeniable truth. Elise Moreau was no longer the overlooked eldest child. She was a force, deliberate and unyielding, capable of standing firm when it mattered most. For the first time in decades, I felt fully, profoundly, entirely in control. Part 6: Consequences and Freedom. 6 months later, the world felt unrecognizable, yet somehow it felt entirely mine. The house on Linden Street, once a source of tension and silent wars, had become a sanctuary of peace and quiet triumph. The air seemed lighter here, imbued with the lingering presence of Grandma Margot's spirit, and I finally felt the stillness that had eluded me for so many years. The garden, now in full bloom with carnations, roses, and lilacs, carried the scent of memory and resilience. Every morning, I would walk among the flowers, brushing my fingers over petals that seemed to whisper her words. "This is yours. You've earned it. You deserve it." Sophie came to work every day, but the dynamic between us had shifted irrevocably. Once the center of attention and privilege, she now walked cautiously through the halls of the Linden Street satellite office, avoiding my gaze, her once confident steps now measured and uncertain. The air between us was thick with unspoken tension, a mixture of resentment, envy, and the unacknowledged realization that she had lost her leverage. Without the shield of parental favoritism, her performance quickly faltered. Tasks she had previously managed with ease now seemed overwhelming. Reports were late, meetings missed, and deadlines ignored. Within a few months, Lucas, whose patience had limits even for family connections, made the difficult decision to let her go. Her dismissal was quiet but firm, a formal letter delivered to her desk, confirming the termination of her employment due to consistent underperformance. I felt no glee, only a calm acknowledgement. This was a natural consequence of choices and privileges unearned. Sophie had lived in the shadow of protection for too long, and now she faced the reality of accountability, the cold arithmetic of merit and skill. She had no one to blame but herself and the family who had coddled her for so long. Meanwhile, my parents, Henri and Claire, had retreated entirely. They moved to Spain, ostensibly to enjoy their retirement in the sun, but in truth they were fleeing the reality they had created, an undeniable confrontation with their own favoritism and failures. Their absence left a kind of peace in its wake, a vacuum in which I could exist without daily reminders of their judgment and manipulation. Letters came infrequently, polite but tinged with an attempt at guilt, and each one I left unanswered, choosing silence as my shield. For me, life had transformed into something I had never truly known: stability and autonomy. Living in Grandma Margot's house was not merely a matter of possession. It was a reclamation of history, of memories, and of personal agency. I took care of the garden, watering each plant, pruning each branch, tending to the soil as though it were an extension of myself. The old roses bloomed with particular splendor that spring, a reminder that patience and care produce enduring beauty. I could hear her voice in every rustle of leaves, in every gentle wind, encouraging me to nurture not only the flowers but the life I was now building. Lucas, ever thoughtful, had moved the marketing team to a different location, relieving the potential friction of having Sophie under the same roof. Yet my lease remained secure, giving me the quiet confidence of permanence and autonomy. I could live my life uninterrupted, focus on my work, my aspirations, and my personal growth, all without interference. The house had become more than bricks and mortar. It was a fortress of freedom, a symbol of the life I had fought for and earned. One afternoon, while sorting through the wardrobe in the old study, now cleared of Sophie's clutter, I discovered a small, dust-covered box I had never noticed before. It was tucked into the back corner, almost hidden, as if waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Inside were letters, handwritten, delicate and familiar, Grandma Margot's handwriting dancing across the pages. I carefully opened the top envelope, and as I read, tears filled my eyes. One letter, addressed to me but never sent, began, "Dearest Elise, they will try to dim your light, but it will continue to burn. Never hesitate to claim what belongs to you. You are strong, capable, and worthy of all that life offers. Remember that they may not see it, but I always will." I sank into the armchair by the window, the spring sunlight falling softly across the pages, and I cried quietly without shame. These words, written long before the storm on Linden Street, had anticipated everything. Grandma Margot had seen through the favoritism, the manipulations, and the injustices. She had known that the house, and more importantly the life it represented, would one day belong to me. And now, holding these letters, I understood that her foresight had guided me even in her absence. life continued with an unexpected rhythm. Neighbors, once casual acquaintances, became an extended family. Mrs. Van Houten often brought over tea and stories of Margot's old days, while the children on the street learned that Elise Moreau was someone who deserved respect and admiration. Conversations that once would have seemed superficial now carried depth and warmth, and slowly I realized that the community around me had filled the void left by my parents' absence and Sophie's withdrawal. Financially, the leaseback agreement with Lucas proved invaluable. The low rent allowed me to save diligently, invest wisely, and build a career rooted in independence. I finally had the space, both literal and metaphorical, to grow, free from constant familial scrutiny or interference. The Linden Street house was no longer just a residence. It was a platform from which I could launch the next stage of my life, combining professional ambition with personal freedom. Sophie, in her post-dismissal life, faced a humbling reality. No longer supported by parental largesse or the protective shield of nepotism, she moved into a modest apartment, stripped of luxury and grandeur. Her messages, sent intermittently, were a mixture of bitterness, jealousy, and reluctant acknowledgement. One day, her text arrived, short and sharp. "You won, Elise. Happy now?" I paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard, and smiled softly. I typed back, "I am free. That is the difference." There was no gloating, no triumph in the sense of cruelty. Freedom, not victory, was the true reward. It was the culmination of years of resilience, patience, and strategic thinking. Freedom meant living without the constant need to appease, to justify, or to negotiate for the recognition that should have been mine all along. Even the house, with its familiar rooms and garden, took on a new significance. Each morning, I walked through the halls with a sense of peace, touching the furniture, the shelves, the windows that framed views of the garden, and I felt connected not just to the house, but to the lineage of care and love that had made it possible. Margot's influence, her guidance, and her quiet support seemed to linger in the corners, in the sunlight filtering through the curtains, and in the gentle sway of the rose bushes outside. Neighbors would comment, often softly, about how they had observed my journey from the overlooked eldest child to the woman standing firmly in her own life. Their admiration was humbling, but it was not for my victory over family, it was for my resilience, my ability to maintain integrity and dignity despite years of neglect and pressure. This recognition, more than any legal document or material possession, felt like a gift, a validation of the person I had always been, quietly striving and enduring. Life in Linden Street was not just survival, it was flourishing. I established routines that honored Margot's memory, tending the garden, hosting quiet gatherings for close friends, and creating spaces in the house where creativity and reflection could thrive. Kitchens smelled of baking bread and apples, reminiscent of long-ago afternoons with Margot teaching me to measure and mix, to savor not just the results but the process. The study room, once a site of academic triumphs and pressures, became a sanctuary of reading, planning, and reflection, a space I could claim fully as my own. Through all this, the lessons of the past 6 months crystallized into enduring truths, that independence is earned through persistence, that recognition and respect must sometimes be claimed rather than expected, and that family in its conventional sense may fail to provide the support one truly needs. The community I had built, the connections I had nurtured, and the life I had carved out were more authentic, more sustaining, and far more rewarding than any approval I had once sought from my parents or Sophie. And so, as the sun set over Linden Street, casting warm amber light over the garden and the brick facade, I finally allowed myself to breathe deeply, fully, and without fear. The house was mine, yes, but more importantly, the life it represented, the freedom it embodied, and the choices it safeguarded were entirely, unequivocally mine. I was no longer the overlooked eldest child, the shadow in which Sophie thrived. I was Elise Moreau, independent, resilient, and free. For the first time in my life, I felt entirely whole. Part 7: Lessons and a Call to Action. This story, at its heart, is about choosing yourself when no one else does. It is about standing firm in the face of manipulation, of realizing that the boundaries you set are as sacred as any inheritance, and that self-respect is more enduring than familial approval. Growing up overshadowed by Sophie, living in a world where every achievement of mine was invisible compared to her perfections, I learned the hard way that love and recognition are not always given, they are earned, claimed, and sometimes created for yourself. As I sit now in Linden Street, watching the sun filter through the lace curtains Grandma Margot once admired, I reflect on what these past years have taught me. The battle over the Linden Street house was more than a confrontation over property. It was a confrontation with the patterns of my past, the expectations imposed upon me, and the people who sought to define my worth. Through this, I distilled 5 lessons that I want to share, in hopes that they resonate with anyone who has ever felt unseen, unheard, or undervalued. Lesson 1: Claim your rightful place. Too often, we wait for validation from those who are unwilling or incapable of giving it. I waited silently for years. Good grades, career milestones, and personal achievements went unnoticed, eclipsed by Sophie's charm and my parents' bias. The moment I realized the house was mine, I understood that I did not need anyone's permission to claim what was rightfully mine. Claiming your rightful place is not arrogance. It is recognition of your own effort, your own value, and your own legacy. Lesson 2: Preparation is power. The power of the Linden Street moment did not appear spontaneously. It was the result of careful planning, strategic thought, and quiet persistence. The sale of the house to Lucas, the lease-back agreement, and the timing of my disclosure were all deliberate acts. Preparation gives you leverage, confidence, and clarity when faced with pressure. It is often the silent work behind the scenes that makes the difference when the spotlight finally shines. Lesson 3: Boundaries are non-negotiable. I learned that saying no is not a failure or a betrayal, it is self-preservation. Family, as loving as it can sometimes seem, can also overstep, manipulate, and demand more than you can or should give. When my parents and Sophie pressured me, threatening exclusion and disappointment, I realized that firm boundaries were not cruelty. They were the architecture of respect, the invisible walls that protect your life, your choices, and your dignity. Lesson 4: Support can come from unexpected places. Grandma Margot had always believed in me when no one else did. Lucas, a former classmate turned CEO, became an unexpected ally at precisely the right moment. And the neighbors, witnesses to my lifelong struggle, offered affirmation that family was not the only source of validation or support. Life often provides allies in the most unlikely forms, but you must recognize them and allow them into your journey. True support amplifies your strength without demanding conformity or loyalty beyond your values. Lesson 5: Freedom is the ultimate victory. When Sophie was dismissed from the company, when my parents left for Spain, and when the Linden Street house became a place I could finally call my own, I understood that the real triumph was not material. It was the freedom to live life on my terms, to nurture my passions, to honor my commitments, and to exist without fear of being undermined or diminished. Freedom, not revenge or retaliation, is the culmination of resilience, wisdom, and courage. Looking back, the journey from overlooked eldest child to confident, independent woman was neither linear nor easy. There were moments of self-doubt, frustration, and sadness. There were nights when I questioned whether standing up for myself was worth the cost, and mornings when the weight of isolation felt unbearable. But each challenge became a lesson, each disappointment a stepping stone. Grandma Margot's foresight, the carefully orchestrated legal strategy, and the alliances I cultivated all converged to create a future that was unmistakably wholly mine. For anyone watching this story unfold who has ever felt pressured to surrender what is rightfully theirs, I want to emphasize this: you are not alone. You may face opposition, resistance, or incredulity from those closest to you, but claiming your agency is an act of courage, not rebellion. Standing firm is not selfish, it is necessary. Protecting your boundaries, honoring your worth, and nurturing your freedom is a gift to yourself and, ultimately, a gift to the world that benefits from your fullest potential. If you have ever faced similar challenges, whether it was defending an inheritance, asserting yourself in a workplace, or navigating family dynamics, take a moment to reflect on your own story. What boundaries have you set? What did you lose and what did you gain? Sharing your experience can empower others, illuminate new perspectives, and remind us all that resilience is cultivated through action, not passivity. I invite you to like this video, share it with friends or family who might need encouragement, and subscribe to the channel. By doing so, you join a community that honors strength, resilience, and the courage to claim one's life. Every comment, every interaction, and every story shared becomes part of a collective acknowledgement that choosing yourself is not just an act of self-preservation, but an act of empowerment. As Grandma Margot once said to me in the quiet of a sunlit kitchen, "The best revenge is a perfectly executed plan." I have found that this truth extends far beyond legal contracts and property. It is a lesson in life itself. Meticulous preparation, integrity, and courage yield not only justice but liberation. That liberation is what I now live each day, in the house that belonged to Margot, in the garden she loved, and in the life I have consciously built. So, if this story resonates with you, if it stirs a memory or inspires a choice you have yet to make, remember that claiming your agency, standing firm, and safeguarding your freedom is a journey worth taking. You are capable of building a life that honors your value, protects your dignity, and celebrates your uniqueness. Let Elise Moreau's story be a reminder that you can emerge from the shadows, from neglect or manipulation, to claim your rightful place in the world. And finally, don't forget to hit the like button, share this video with others who may need a spark of courage, and subscribe to the channel to be part of a growing community that champions self-respect, wisdom, and resilience. Because as Grandma Margot taught me, the ultimate victory is not in confrontation or bitterness, but in the quiet, enduring power of a life fully and unapologetically your own.